Today we will develop a really interesting project that will be fun to use and you can add to your own portfolio of fun side projects. It is really important to have a sound portfolio, especially if you are a self-taught developer and trying to land that first job. But even if you work as a software developer already, it is important to build a nice stack of projects that you developed in your free time outside of your job to show future employers you are constantly evolving. The project we will develop will help us check if a certain password was hacked. First thing, before starting any project, we take a step back and we will try to understand what do we try to achieve. So what do we want our smart project to do? We want to be able to feed it one or more passwords, and for each of them I want to know if they have been previously hacked or not. We will do this in two ways, either by passing a bunch of passwords as arguments when we call the script, or by creating an environment variable called passwords and taking the passwords from there. So let's see how will our final product look. Don't worry, we will code everything together from scratch so that we can learn, but for now I will just show you what we try to achieve so that we know where we want to go. So if you want to check 1 up to 3 passwords, you can run it in line as follows. Python check my password, say here false. Don't worry about this false now, we will explain everything later and you will understand where this comes from. So let's say test 1 2 3 4 and let's give it a more funny name, Snoopy 1 2 3, and let's see what we have. So we see that test 1 2 3 4 was found 54,000 times, and Snoopy 1 2 3 surprisingly was found almost 13,000 times. But if we have more than 3 passwords, let's say you have a bunch of them you want to check constantly without retyping them every time you want to check them, we will use a .env file where we will set some environment variables in order to securely store your passwords. Now you can run your Python program as follows. First, I'm just gonna show you quickly how that file looks like. Let's say vim.env. So here you see I put an environment variable called passwords and I just said test 1 2 3 for now, but of course we can separate them by comma and then say snoop 1 2 3, and then we go out of here and then we run the program again and then we say true. So I guess now you have a bit of an idea where this true or false comes from. It's about if we want to check those environment variables or not, but like I said, don't worry about it, we will just understand how it's used later. So now let's run this, and now when you run this we see again test 1 2 3 was found 102,000 times. So now we see also it works also like this. Cool. So now that we saw what we tried to achieve, let's move forward and start our project. In order to check if a password has been hacked, we will have to use an API developed by haveibeenpwned.com, this website here. So let's have a look at our API. Let's API overview. So in order to check if our password has been hacked, we need to use this section here, pwned passwords, search by range. Cool. So let's read a bit of documentation of this API. So how can we use this? So we have to use this URL api.pwnedpasswords.com/range, and then it allows the first 5 characters of a SHA-1 password hash. Cool. So what we have to do, and we see that it's not case sensitive. Good, that's important. So once we pass that, it will return all the passwords that begin with the 5 hash characters and the count of each one of them, which means that after that we can match this whole password with what we have, with our own hashes, and see if we can find it there, and then we can retrieve the count from there. Guess it's pretty straightforward. So let's proceed to the development. Let's go to the fun part now. So let's start our project. Let's first create the working directory. Let's say here the name of the project. Let's say check password. Yeah. Now let's go here into the check password directory that we just created. Now the first thing we will do is to create a Python virtual environment. So to do that, we will say Python 3, and then let's say -m vn, and here let's give it a name to our virtual environment. Let's say password env. Yeah, good. This will create our virtual environment, and now if you do ls install, you will see that we have this folder called password env. We have created our virtual environment, but the virtual environment is not active yet. So let's activate our virtual environment, and we'll do this by using the source command. Source, we give the name of the environment, then under the bin folder we have the activate script, which will activate our virtual environment. Let's do that, and here, as you can see, we have password env set up, which means that now we are in our virtual environment. Now that we created our virtual environment, what we need to do is to add to our virtual environment all the packages that we need to work with. So in our case, we need to do pip install. This is the command which we use to install Python packages. So we will install a package called requests, which will help us make our request to the API. Good. Now what we have to do is also to install the python.env package, and this will help us work with environment variables. So let's go here, pip install python.env. Cool, this installs. Now if we want to see all the packages that we have installed in our virtual environment, what we have to do is just do pip list, and it shows us that we have here, you see, python.env and requests and all the other packages that come by default when we create our virtual environment. Let's start the coding. Cool, now that we open Visual Studio Code, let's create our Python script. We say check pass.py. Cool. So first we will develop the solution for which we will give the password or passwords as arguments in the command line. That will be the first thing, and after that we will develop the solution which uses the environment variables. But yeah, let's start with this for now. Cool. So what I want to do first is to import the necessary packages. So I'm gonna import requests. Like I said, we will need this to make our request to the API. Import hashlib. We need to import hashlib because this is something we will use to create the SHA-1 hash of our password. Import sys. We need to import sys because this will help us get the arguments from the command line. Now let's start to develop our main method. Let's start with main, which takes args, which means that when we will run this script, we'll pass in the passwords as arguments, and then we will say this for passwords password in args. Okay, for this one we will say we will retrieve the count, so how many times this password was found in the hacked passwords. So let's say we call a method called check password, which is not created yet. We will create it immediately after this, but first let's just create the structure of our project. Now we say if count, which means that if we have a count, which means that if our password has been found in the hacked passwords, then let's print a message here. We will print something like, let's put an F string here. So we will print something like the password itself was found. Let's say was found. Count times. Else, if the password was not being found in the hacked passwords response, then we will just say print again an F string here, and here we will say the password was not found. This is it. And one more thing we have to do here, we say if name equals main, which means that run the code under this if only if this specific file has been run. We call main of sys.rgv. So this will give us the array of parameters that we pass on when we call this script. And we start from 1. Why? Because the first parameter is the name of the file, and then all the other parameters are the ones that we will put in. So now let's code the check password method. So we see we take in the password as parameter. Now, as we saw in our API, what we need to pass in is the first 5 characters of the SHA-1 hashed password. So let's hash it first. So we say SHA-1 password equals, in order to SHA-1 hash our password, what we need to do is to use the hashlib sha1. Now the sha1 method needs a UTF-8 encoded string, so we're gonna say password dot encode of UTF-8. Perfect. Now we say hex digest, and we need it in uppercase. Yeah, we need it in uppercase, as we saw in the API documentation. Now, all we need to pass to our URL are the first 5 characters. So then we're gonna do this password first 5, but we also need to keep in the tail, so that later when we retrieve all the passwords in the response, we can compare the whole string. So then we're gonna say password tail equals sha1 password, and I'm gonna say give me first 5 characters, and for the tail we're gonna say sha1 password give me all the characters from position number 5. Good. Sorry for the Java thing. We're coding Python today. So now we need to fetch in the response. So we have to say call pond API. This method we didn't develop yet, we'll develop it immediately, and we're gonna pass in the first 5 characters. Cool. And what we want to return, actually, it's how many times our password has been found. So it's not just the response, we're gonna return, and let's say get leaks from response. Yeah, so like this we get how many time our password has been leaked, and then we say response password. Great, that's it. Password tail. So now if you're wondering why we passed in only the password tail here, that is because the API returns the suffix of the password and the count of how many times the password has been found. So this is why we just pass on only the tail. So now let's implement the call Pond API. Oh, again this sign that I don't know how to pronounce in English at this moment because I just woke up and it's morning. So let's implement this method here nicely. Now, as you saw in the API, we need to call a certain URL for that, and that is, I have it here in my notes. Yeah, this is the URL we need to call, and it's a get method, and then we will pass the password first 5, just like we saw in the API. Now we need to get the response, and that we get with the help of the requests package that we just imported. So we're gonna say request get because it's a get method, and we get the URL. Now we have the response. So if we have response status code, so if the status code is not 200, which means it's not a success, then we're gonna raise, sorry, bear with me here, we're gonna raise a runtime error. Yeah, and here we're gonna say the API response error code is, and then I'm gonna put in here our response dot status code. Great. Else, if we don't have an error, we're just gonna return the response. Now the last method that we need to implement before we're gonna have something running, so let's get excited because soon we can run and see how it works, is to implement the get leaks response. Why? Because what we want to achieve, like we said, we want to get the count, which represents how many times our password has been found, and which means how many times our password has been hacked. So let's go there and let's start doing that. Good. So perfect. As we can see in the API docs, the response comes in the form of the suffix of the password, that actually is the suffix of the SHA-1 hashed password, and the count. So now what we need to do is to parse each line and match it with our SHA-1 hash and return the second part of the response, which is the count. So let's go and start doing that, right? So let's say response hashes. So let's say we will iterate over them. Let's call the variable line split. So we'll split it by semicolon as we saw in the API docs. And now we're gonna say for the line in response text dot split lines, yeah, because we're gonna take each line like we said and we're gonna parse it. And now we're gonna say for response hash and count in response hashes. Now we say if the response hash, right, matches our password tail, which is the suffix in this case, So we're gonna say if this equals password tail, then return the count. Else, if nothing was found, we'll just return 0. Nice. So now that we have our code done, let's try to test. So I'm gonna say Python, check my pass, and now let's pass in the passwords. Let's do the same as we did yesterday. And Snoopy123, and let's see what we get. So we get the same thing as we got yesterday. Test1234 was found 54,000 times, almost 55,000 times, and Snoopy123 the same, almost 13,000 times. Nice. So it's working. But what we said yesterday, what if we have 10, 15, 20 passwords that we need to check? So then what will we do? We said that a safe way to handle that is to store our passwords in an environment variable. To do that and to be able to parse those, what we need to create, it's a .env file. So let's do it here, touch .env file. Now if we check here, we see that we have the .env file created. Now let's open it and insert some passwords into it. Okay, so let's do vim.env. So let's say we're gonna call our environment variable passwords. You can call it however you want, of course. I'm gonna call it passwords. So I'm gonna pass again test1234. Let's say we put in Snoopy123. So the first two that we had before. Let's say we want to see more passwords. Let's see how many people have just password and also password 123. I think we have enough for now. Let's go out of here. Cool. Now that we have our passwords in the environment variable file, let's modify our program so that we can fetch those passwords and run them through the same logic as we developed before and see how that will look like. So for that we don't need to change that much. What we need to change is this side here, because as we saw here, we call the main with all the arguments starting from position 1, because as you remember we said that at position 0 we have the name of the file. So how would we go about this? Okay, so let's say that what we want, and you saw when I ran the finished product that what I passed in was a flag, true or false. That was the first parameter, and then I passed in the passwords. Let's try to have that flag created. So we say useenv, we're gonna call that flag like this, and we're gonna say sys.rgv at 1, yeah, because now our first argument will be the flag, true or false. But of course, to enforce that the flag is true or false, we're gonna say like this. So let's say that useenv comes in as true. So it will come in, of course, as a string, true. Yeah. In case we're gonna pass in true, then I want to fetch my passwords from the .env file. We do this by importing first OS. And if you remember, we also installed another package which was called .env. So to import from there, we're gonna say from .env import load.env, and we're gonna call load.env here. This one will load our file. Nice. Now that we have the file loaded, now we can continue. So because we imported also the OS package, we can say like this: passwords, which will be the string of passwords, comma separated. We're gonna say os dot environ, which means environment, get, and we called our string passwords, or if you gave it another name, you will pass in that name here. So passwords. And we're gonna split them by comma. Yeah? So when we call split by comma, it will return a list with all the words which were previously comma separated. Good, so now we have the passwords. So now what we need to do is just call the method main of passwords. That's all there is for this part. Now what if our flag is false? Yeah, what if we put there false? Because we don't want to fetch the passwords from the .env file, we just want to pass them ourselves. So in this case, if we have false, then we're gonna call also main sys.rgv, but this time we're gonna start at position 2, yeah, because 0 is the name of the file, 1 is the flag, true or false, and then from position 2 our passwords will start. Okay, else if we don't have true or false, we're just gonna throw an error because we only accept true or false. So you're gonna enforce that the user can only pass true or false. So we're gonna say erase runtime error, and then we're gonna say invalid first argument, true or false required. These are all the changes we need to make so that we can use the .env file to fetch our passwords. Let's test it, of course. So first, let's assume here, so we say Python, check my pass. So let's assume that instead of true or false, we're gonna give some other string. Let's say test. You see, it says runtime error, invalid first argument. Cool, that's perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. So now let's say this time let's pass in true, which means take the passwords from the .env file. So you're gonna pass in true, and this is exactly what it does. It takes each password and it tells us how many times it was found, as you can see here. Cool. Now let's assume that we pass in false. Once again we say I don't want to use the file, I just want to pass in like one password just to test it real quick. So let's say again we're gonna pass something like butterfly123, and it works. As you can see, I pass in the password and it was found 3,400 times. So now we have the complete solution in our hands. It looks good, we have all the methods implemented. You can use either the .env file or just pass in all the passwords, whatever you prefer. I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and you enjoyed coding along with me. And thank you for your patience for all the small things that you had to wait for. I'm really having a blast making this type of videos, so expect more coming soon. This was just a small but very useful and cool project. But the next one will be an enterprise application, so it will be a bigger one. I will also do more LeetCode problems, because if some of you prepare for, I don't know, interviews or stuff like this, it will be useful to have those there as well, to just watch them and learn from them. And that's it. Once again, thank you for watching and see you in the next one.